Good morning, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Yep. Can you hear me at the back? In the UK, we say, in the cheap seats. Can you hear me? Yeah. Good. I'm Robert Brown. So this morning at 4:30, I was up on deck 14 smoking a cigar. And I'm sure I met myself coming back from last night. So what I'm trying to say is my internal body clock is in turmoil. Does anybody relate? Hey, you're good. It's not only me then. I'm mindful that today is Veteran Day, and back in the UK it's Armistice Day, the 11th of November, so I think it's only fair that we briefly are mindful of those who made the ultimate sacrifice so we can be here today. Okay? So, let's move on. Hopefully my zapper is working today. So this is the fourth talk in the series of 7. And we're going to be looking at gut feeling, insurance losses and fraud. A gentleman, Kelvin, I don't know if he's in this morning, but he asked me a question at the last lecture talk about whether I actually came across a circumstance where an electrical fuse, I refer to it as being circumvented. What I mean by that, and please don't hold your hands up if you've done this. If you've got an electrical fuse and it's blown, and you've got some silver foil, aluminum, oh, he's here, Kelvin. You're late. You get some homework or lines for this now, you know. What I mean by a circumvented, this is your question, okay? What I mean by a circumvented fuse is somebody's illicitly tampered with it. So they may have wrapped aluminium foil around it, or they may have got a cigarette, foil from a cigarette packet and wrapped it round just so it would work. Or we could have put a nail in there or something like that. So this particular case was a car wash in Bethnal Green in London, that's in the east end of London, a real Cockney area. And it was called Mr. Bubbles. And the owner was an Eastern European, I don't know which country he came from, but he got lads from his own country, and he gave them accommodation in the back of this particular car wash, paid them a minimal wage, very, very low, and unfortunately the electrical system wasn't in a very good state. It had no earth, it was dangerous. The guys lived in the back of the property in squalor, but they were thankful that they'd got a job and they were working and they were getting a wage. And this is what was found. So we've got an electrical fuse holder, the fuse would be underneath here, but they'd circumvented it with wire. So when it was asked by the electrical system, not would you do, but you know what I'm saying, it didn't operate. And so the guy was tragically electrocuted. And the Eastern European owner was prosecuted and he received a prison sentence for culpable manslaughter. Yep. I just want to recap on, I showed this slide in the last talk where I introduced the different facets of generating an expert report. And this one is references. And what I wanted to bring out, which I didn't in the last talk, but what I wanted to bring out is it's very important when I write an expert report that I rely on other people's information. And that information has to be very sound, both in a legal sense and in a scientific sense. I can't just pluck thoughts from anywhere. I have to base my opinions on sound research and sound documents. So there's a reference section where I set out the documents that I've relied upon. Now, I was in court once, the Royal Courts of Justice in London, where an advocate, a barrister lawyer, was cross-examining a particular expert witness, and he said, "Sir, can you tell me where you got this information from?" And he said, the guy said, "Well, I got it from," I can't remember, but "I got it from here." And he said, "Well, respectfully, sir, we don't know where you got it from, and so we can't cross-check that reference. So all your opinions being based on this particular piece of science or whatever, we can't check." Now what that actually meant was his expert report, their opinions, the commentary, then fell down. And he as an expert witness, his credibility also fell. So it's important as an expert witness that we put every bit of information down and where we got it from, so somebody can go and pick that document and look at it and understand it. I also touched on this in the last lecture. My friend Kelvin asked me about this morning. And I think in talking about electricity, I might have caused people distress. Ooh, it's dangerous. Yeah. So I just introduced this, which is to do with this electrical heater. And we went through some simple maths, and we derived that for a voltage of 230 volts, which is the supply voltage in the United Kingdom, this particular heater will draw 8.7 amps current. And if we use this heater in the US, it having a domestic voltage of 120 volts, it would draw 16.67 amps. So what that means that if you wanted to protect that heater, in this case you'd have to put a fuse in the appliance or somewhere else of 8.7 and greater. And if you're in the US, you'd have to put 16.67 or greater. Now, given what I said in the last talk, if we put an 8.7 amp fuse in, it will get hot because it's just on the borderline of operation. So in our fuses in the UK, we put a 13 amp fuse in the plug to protect that. Why 13 amps? I don't know. It's a funny figure, isn't it? Why not 10 or 15 or 20? But it's what they refer to as not expected, but they've got a range of fuse sizes. There's 3, 5, 8, 10, 13, 18, 20 and above. Shows what a bit of an anorak I am, that I can remember them. And I would imagine that in the United States and elsewhere, you'll have, that's the term, preferred values for fuses. Okay? Don't put a nail in to protect that, it will blow up. Okay? So, we come to the subject of today's talk, which is, you can read it, gut feeling, insurance loss and insurance fraud. And we were looking at, this is what we're looking at today. Our forensic evidence supports insurance loss or looks at insurance and fraudulent claims and things like that. We'll look at some things involving fire damage, arson, water damage, and other things. So, we're going to start off by looking at these things, an insulator and conductors. Now, an insulator is something of high resistance, so it will not conduct electrical current. Yeah? So, we get things like this. Plastics, ceramics, rubber and glass are all good insulators. Yeah? So for instance, your plugs and your cables all have an outer coating made of plastic or some form of plastic. protect you from the copper conductors that's inside it. Good conductors are usually metallic elements, and gold is a very good electrical conductor. We get silver, copper, things like that. Now, we'll look at water, whether it's an insulator or a conductor. Condensate water, we're talking about pure water. What do you think, conductor or insulator? But it's actually an insulator. Yeah? And the reason it's an insulator is because it's got no minerals or impurities within it. It's a condensate. Although in the condensation process, all the minerals have been extracted. What about faucet tap water? Correct. Because it has inherent minerals. Yeah? What about salt water, seawater, saline, conductor? So, what about the human body? Conductor. Why? Because respectfully, we're a body of salt solution, saline. Yeah. What about this one? Air. The air that we breathe. It depends. Somebody mentioned argue. Now, in a normal sense, air is an insulator. It doesn't conduct electricity. But under some circumstances, it can be provoked to conduct electricity. Kelvin, my friend who's just down here, has mentioned moisture content. If we consider, like this morning at 4:30, it was very moist. And so the air had got a lot of water vapour within it. So it could be then a good medium to conduct electricity if the circumstances were right. And if the circumstances are right, we can, an electrical phenomena manifests which refers to as electrical arcing. Now what that means is that if we have two electrical conductors, let me say 2 pieces of wire, and there's an air gap in between, under certain circumstances, that air gap, which in normal circumstances is an insulator, can be made to conduct electrical current from A to B. Now, when it does, the electrical arc is referred to in scientific terms as a gaseous electrical conductor, and its temperature is very high, 20,000 degrees centigrade or thereabouts. And when it manifests, we see this blue-white intense light, which is indicative of weather lightning, which is electrical arcing in its extreme. So that's a photograph of 2 electrodes, and it's got an electrical arc stuck between them. And it's referred to as an arc because of the hot gases that it generates. It bends into an arc. This isn't an industrial arc. So what's happened here is this is in a substation, and there's a switch that comes over there, and they've switched the power off, so this switching going from there to there has drawn this arc. Yeah? Now we all utilise a form of electrical arcing every day in an internal combustion engine. The spark plug has the spark. In a scientific sense, this is a spark where this is an arc. We won't go into the scientific differences, but fundamentally, They're all very, very similar. Yeah? So as a forensic engineer, when I go and look at forensic evidence, let's say in the case of an electrical fire, I look at electrical conductors. So this is an example of a copper conductor, well, 3 copper conductors, in various stages of their disintegration. So this top conductor has a copper core, and on the outer edges here, it would be covered in a plastic coating insulator. So the heat generated in that wire has at these points carbonised the plastic coating. We can see that. Yeah? If we move on in time and that electrical wire continues to heat, it becomes molten. And we can see here, it's being stopped in action, that around this point, it started to become molten, and here, that molten copper has started to form into a spheroid. It's going to become like a raindrop, and eventually it'll drop away. When it does break, because we've got 2 separate conductors, that the break in between may, doesn't always, but sometimes, most often, it provokes the manifestation of an electrical arc. So when I look at fire, and I'm looking for evidence of the causation of the fire, I look for this evidence, which is, as we can see, the 2 electrodes, and we can see here that it's become molten, and it started to form a spheroid, a sphere, and the edges are very rounded. That one's where it's broken. You can see the same happening here. So that is evidence of electrical arcing. What does that mean in the case? Before we move on to the case, I want to talk about electrical shocks first. And this is where the insurance loss and the insurance fraud comes into what we're talking about today. Now, unfortunately, a lot of claims for electrical shock are fraudulent. Some are legitimate, some are fraudulent. Yesterday I got this email from a solicitor in the UK, and he said, basically, I'll just give you a few seconds to read that. Has everybody digested that? So what do you think? Truthful explanation or fraudulent? Truthful. Say again, sorry? There is, but what I'll do, if you allow me to, is in the next lecture I'll expand a little bit further on this as to what documents I'm going to ask for from this solicitor and the information to start to base my opinion on whether this is a legitimate electrical shock or it's a fraudulent electrical shock. But in terms of electrical shocks, in the course of investigating such a thing, most forensic engineers use an international standard. It's accepted in the UK as up here, BS 60479. I'm sure it's accepted in the US as well. But this is an international standard. And what this graph's showing is the magnitude of electrical current against time. And on this graph, we've got different zones, AC 1, 2, 3, like that. And these zones relate to the physiological effects that a human being would experience in the course of an electrical shock. The important thing to know from this diagram is the scale here, MA, which stands for milliamps, and a milliamp is 1,000th of 1 amp, so it's very small. And up here we've got time in duration of current flow in seconds. So if we look here at 500 milliamps is half a second. So I'll just move on a little bit further. This was the graph from the former slide, and these are the physiological effects of an electrical shock. So in zone AC1, which is 5 milliamps, that's 5,000ths of 1 amps, we get these physiological effects. Yeah, you can all read that. And as we move on in the magnitude of current, we get to these parts here, which establishes AC3. We start to get muscular contractions, difficulty of breathing, things like that. And then further up here, we get cardiac arrest. This is an important document which we all work for. And I say this respectfully, I don't know where this information has come from. Obviously it's come from somewhere, but being a scientist and a researcher, I don't know how they've come with this data, because I can't visualise a line of people working on and say, all right, put the electrical shock on here and let's see what happens. I have an idea where it's come from, which has sinister implications, but I won't go into that because it's Veterans Day. Yeah, but a cadaver's dead. But I take the point. So now we come back to this. We're trying to associate forensic evidence with an electrical shock. And these are pictures from an investigation. And this involves somebody in the UK who alleges that they received an electrical shock off this light switch. Right. And the person says at the time there'd been a water leak in a bathroom. And it had impinged on this light switch. And when she went, sorry I told you, when the person went to switch it off, she got an electrical shock. Yep. So, as a forensic engineer, I have to look at these incidents. And first of all, you're faced with this. I accept that I went to inspect this circumstance sometime after the incident. And irrespective of all these dirty marks, and I say this respectfully, but it wasn't a very hygienic apartment I went into. But what I'm looking for is when there's a water leak, the water leak leaves staining. Yeah? It's difficult to get rid of the staining, to eliminate it. We have to use special paints. So I'm looking at this light switch and I'm looking for staining of the plaster, the paintwork around it, which is indicative that water has been in the area of this light switch. And then look at inside of this light switch, and if you can see here, on the wires we've got dust and debris. Also, there's no staining around the light switch. Also in the bottom here, where the cables come in, are holes. So if water had come down the void, in the plaster void, it would have exited through the holes. And if we look at the cables themselves, they don't show any signs of heat distress. The other point to look at is this thing. This is the front of the switch. And it's made from plastic. And plastic is an insulator. Now it could be that water dripped down the wall, went onto the front of here, but for a mechanism of an electrical shock to be present, that water has got to touch a live part. And so in this circumstance, I don't think the person actually received an electrical shock. Also, within her testimony of, I keep saying her, what is her? Also in the testimony, she alleges that the electrical shock physically threw her backwards and she landed on the floor and she sustained injuries through that. Also, her fingers and hands were blackened through a subaccumulation due to electrical arcing. We look at that again. We can see that there's no charring of any of the cables, so that circumstance indicates to me that there was no electrical arcing. Additionally, none of the wires, the copper wires in that switch have actually parted. There's no eroding of metal, so there's no electrical arcing. I showed this slide in the first lecture, and this is another circumstance of a fraudulent insurance claim. Similarly, the person expresses that they were thrown backwards again, deposits of soot on the hand, physiological injuries. Here we can see that there's some scorching to the plastic wire. We can also see some carbonisation in the top. We can also see some melting of the plastic back box. But once again, what's interesting to me is, and I explain that, in the conjoining part of the front plate, which in normal would go up, so that part would coincide with that, there's no black charring. Additionally, here we only see carbonisation of the plastic. I examined this and the inner cores are intact. So my understanding of that circumstance means that that blackening has not come from electrical arcing. And I have expressed to the solicitor in this particular case that it's my opinion that this is a fraudulent claim. Moving on from electrical shocks and fraudulent claims, and although the last two had gone legal, that means that we started the legal process. At the back of the legal process, in both cases, somebody's supporting that financially, which is generally an insurance company. And at the stage we were at, they wanted to know the prospect of winning this case. So I said, fraudulent, so they won't support it. Now there's other cases where we have to go a little bit further. And this is a case at General Electric in Gebze, which is part of Istanbul in Turkey. And GE Electric had manufactured this thing, which is referred to as a shunt reactor. Now, shunt reactors are used in a variety of things, but in this particular case, we were talking about a wind farm. And this wind farm was located offshore at Leicester, which is in the North Sea off the coast of Eastern England. And we had 54 wind turbines, And atop each wind turbine is generally an alternator, and the power of an alternator is in the region of 1 megawatt. So when, as normally is the case in the UK, we get wind, we've got 54 of these things spinning around, each generating 54 megawatts of electrical power, which is then transported to the mainland via 2 electrical cables. And the cables are undersea cables, and they're referred to as HVDC, high voltage direct current cables, the big things. Yeah. Now, to allow this power to be transported, we have an offshore platform, which is basically an electrical substation in which this thing is located. And the purpose of that thing is to make the electricity efficient for transporting offshore. And basically this shunt reactor is basically half a transformer, and it's comprised of these big cylinder things, which are basically copper conductors wrapped via paper for insulation, and all 3 of them are lowered into a tank, and the tank is filled with oil, a special mineral oil. And the reason it's mineral oil is that the electrical withstand capabilities of oil are greater than air. We could build this thing and we could separate them by air, but it'd be massive. So to reduce it in size, we dunk it in a vat of oil. These 3 coils, which are hollow, are connected to this thing, and there's one that goes across, which we refer to as a yoke. And the yoke is fabricated from very thin laminations of steel, which are each separated from each other with varnish. Yep. So what happened in this case is, in the offshore substation, the temperature of the oil is monitored. And also, if you've got a frying pan at home, or oil in a pot, if you start to heat it, you see it generates bubbles. And that's the minerals in the water reacting with the heat, and it's generating a gas. So they also monitor the gas. And in this case, this started to generate ethylene and acetylene. And as we know, acetylene is explosive. So basically, they had to take these things offline. So they got 54 megawatts of power offshore, and they're not able to transport it. So it then becomes a massive, great big insurance claim. So I had to go out to Istanbul, and we stripped this thing down bit by bit. So inside, we have this column of circular laminations, all supposedly insulated from each other with varnish, and eventually we found that the laminations, the insulations, have broken down, and we got this electrical arcing again. And so that was generating the gases, and fundamentally what this indicated to us was that the specifications for this shunt reactor were wrong. In other words, they put a big nail in a fuse where they should have put a bigger fuse. There were lots of costs involved with that one. We're talking millions of pounds. This one was another interesting case. And this is a server rack, and it was in a Vodafone server installation in Munich. And we got a call, and they said, oh, we're getting grey deposits on the front of these server racks. When you went into the complex, there were hundreds of these in lines. And if you can imagine, they'd be dealing with all the telephone, computer data, etc., on the Vodafone network. And the grey deposits were not dust, because this was in a purified system in a room. Too far away. What it was due to is the air within inside the room, which was supposed to be purified via what we refer to as reverse osmosis system, which is the system that takes out all the impurities from the cooling water that failed. So the deposits on front of these racks were salts, saline solution. So this had massive implications, because all these servers, with all your data, if you use Vodafone, was at the prospect of failing. This is an example of what I mean by accumulation of salts. I introduced in the first talk a circumstance where a water company deposited raw sewage onto a beach in southern England, and we were looking at the failure of a particular piece of equipment, a UPS system, uninterruptible power supply. And when we went inside it, and you looked at the circuit boards, you could see that some of the electronic components started to accumulate. They were corroding, and the reason why they were corroding is that the air inside there, the cooling air that was being drawn in, had one, it had moisture in it, and two, it had an H2S, hydrogen sulfide. Hydrogen sulfide is a byproduct of the wastewater process. Both are corrosive, both are conductive, so when we get little copper tracks on a circuit board, this introduces, we refer to it as stray conductive pathways, and it causes the UPS to act in a way that we didn't design it. So just that simple little thing caused a massive environmental problem.
Was that just caused by the casement itself being compromised and moisture getting in?
Kelvin's asking, was the case compromised? No, it wasn't. The case itself had fans, one on the inlet, one on the outlet. So the one on the inlet was pulling air through, and the one on the outlet was sucking air out. So there was an airflow through, cooling air. These should be checked by the maintenance guys every so often. They weren't. The culpability for this sewage outlet fell on to the water company. This is another interesting one, and this is to do with water ingress, not moisture, water ingress. And this centres on a thing called a cofferdam. This is a cofferdam. If you ever pass a bridge or a waterway where things are being constructed, you may see pilings that have been pushed down into the ground. And what we're doing there is they're building a cofferdam. So between the part of the construction and the metal battens that's been pushed into the soil, they've sucked the water out. And that allows you to go down to the bedrock and work on it. In this particular case, a company in Belgium had rented a portable cofferdam to a company in Ireland who were undertaking work on a harbour wall in Helston in the Outer Orkneys. And the way the cofferdam works in this case is that they put it up the side of the wall and then they pump all the water out. And because of the differential pressure, this acts like a limpet and it sticks itself to the side of the wall. So, if you look on the inside, it's got different levels. It allows welders and mechanics to go down underneath the water level and repair this metal wall. Now, in this particular case, because it's a portable device, they had a crane. And this crane would lower that into the ground, and the electrics at the top there would set pumps going, which would suck out the water, and it would stick itself to the wall. Now, every so often, the Irish company said the electrics in the top's flooded and it's failing. And the Belgian company, the manufacturer, said there's no way you can't be doing that. Well, it is. And what we surmise, I was instructed by the Belgian company, what we surmise is that when they were moving this, they dipped it underneath the water. These are Irish lads up in Scotland, like a drink too, and we're just thinking, gone a bit too far, dipped it under the water. This particular device was the subject of a lease, so the Belgian company were leasing this to the Irish company. And they wouldn't pay the lease fees, so it went to court. And it went to court in the Supreme Courts of Scotland. Now, over the course of the next few lectures, I'll introduce these different courts because they have a lot of history. And it's been my privilege to actually work in these courts. Now, this court, Supreme Court of Scotland, is in Edinburgh. And has anybody been to Edinburgh? Beautiful city. And on the on the Royal Mile, you have Edinburgh Castle at one end, and you have Holyrood House at the other end. And in between, about halfway up the hill, is St Giles Cathedral Church, which is where Queen Elizabeth II lay in state from a trip down from Balmoral to London. Behind that is this building, Supreme Court Scotland. On the other side, if you're ever in Scotland, there's a good pub called Eugene Brody's. Brilliant pub. Good whiskey. Inside this building, there's a big hall. This is a picture from the 17th century. And every morning when I was there, and it has done for eons, all the advocates, barristers would meet in this place. They've all got the wigs and the gowns on. And this is what it looks like now. It's an impressive place. And when you get inside there, you can just sense the history of what's gone on before. I always remember that just outside here, there's a corridor, and there's a row of teak boxes with brass plaques on them, and they've all got names on them. And I said to the person who I was working for, "What are these? Urns?" Urns. No, that's from a former time when briefs, pieces of paper with little red ribbons on, were dropped in there for the advocates. That would be a brief for the case. It's a fascinating place. So this case all evolved around these things. Being a bit of an anorak, going about the ship, I've seen these things and refer to them as cable glands. And a cable gland has an ingress protection rating. And it has two modes of protection against ingress. One is the protection against debris, dust, and the other one's protection against moisture, water. And on this particular cofferdam, these glands had been rated as IP, ingress protection, 66, 6, meaning it's got a protection level of 6, which is very high, and protection level against debris ingress, which is very high, and the other 6, or the 66, is its moisture protection. And in a scale, which translates across into the US and elsewhere as well, 6 means that it has the protection that if you blast it with water, then it would withstand the pressure of the water jet. 67 means we increase it 1. The 7 means that the gland can be submerged to a depth of 1 metre and it won't let water in. It's capable of withstanding a depth of 1 metre. So, in court, I was cross-examined by a barrister, and I'll introduce some anecdotes being cross-examined in the next talks. But if you can imagine in the court in the Parliament House in Scotland, it's an old court and it's all wood panelled and it's very stately. And generally in a court, the judge sits at a high bar, and then in the lower court, the advocates stand behind lecterns, prosecution on one side, defendant's barrister on the other, and then in between that, there's a dock for the witnesses, so I'm stood in the dock. And on this particular case, I was cross-examined for 4 hours, which is a long chess game. And I remember distinctly the advocate, the barrister, asking me, he said, now, when you purchase a gland, you will get a set of specifications with it, a data sheet. It tells me who it's been recognised by, all its attributes, what it conforms to, etc. I said, yes, I do. He said, do you believe that specification? I said, yes, I do. He said, wouldn't you send it away and have the gland tested? I said, no, I wouldn't. He said, let me put it another way to you. If you bought a TV, let's say from Walmart, would you send its sales literature away and have that checked? And he went, I'll ask the questions in this court, Dr. Brown. But I move on to this one, which is the last one about fraud and insurance loss. But this actually was a criminal case. And this is the only time that I've undertook a case involving arson. And I'll just let you have a minute or two to just digest. This was sent to me about a guy who he was a managing director of a company in Basildon in Essex, which is just below London. And his company was failing. And in an attempt to regenerate money into the business, he opened a cannabis farm in one of his warehouses. And being a diligent chap, he undertook to get all the best electrical equipment for his cannabis farm. So he bought electrical extension leads, nice heaters, nice lights and things like that. But unfortunately, the cannabis farm set on fire. And consequently, Arthur Guildford, where I for a few weeks on law, whatever it's called. So the police and fire investigators went in and they found that the electrical cables, the extension leads, like this. So this is this is the one we have in the UK, and I think that's one that you'll have in the US. The guy had daisy chained them, like this. Sorry. I'll stand at this side. So daisy chained them. So from the socket you got one, and that fed another, and then that fed another. So basically it was overloading them. And because heat was generated above a certain point, the electrical cables started to burn and cause a fire. So the police brought charges of arson because basically what they were saying is that you did it deliberate and you didn't do it in a safe manner. and so you're culpable of arson. Fundamentally what they were saying is, look guy, if you're going to run a cannabis farm, you've got to do it safely, so you shouldn't actually daisy chain these things together. So when it came to examining the charred remains of these, yes, they are charred, yes, they've been involved in a fire, but as expert witnesses, we couldn't prove beyond all reasonable doubt that daisy chaining them was the cause of the fire. It could be that one of the lamps, the heat lamps, fell over and caused the thing to burn. There'd be other circumstances which could have caused this. So the guy on that particular charge of arson was acquitted. But the fact that he was found with all this cannabis, I don't know what sentence he got, who was found guilty. So, I just thought I'd just introduce this. I showed you this in the first talk. And here we've got this guy, and he's strung from some overhead cables. And the question is, knowing what you know now, does he receive an electrical shock or not? Hands up for yes. Nobody. Hands up for no. All of you. Would somebody like to proffer an opinion why he doesn't receive an electrical shock? Correct. He's not grounded. So this is where it differs from water. If you've got electrical current coming down this wire, it doesn't drop off here to earth. There's no pathway for it to conduct. So it'll just go straight through. Let's change the parameters a little bit, right? Let's say, and I touched on this in the first lecture, let's say a seagull comes along. And let's say the seagull is flapping about and he touches both wires, and that both wires are at 230 volts or the same voltage. Does the seagull receive an electric shock? Hands up for yes. Hands up for no. My gentleman's correct up there. No. Why? Because both wires are at the same potential, and for an electrical current to flow through the seagull, there has to be a difference. So the next question is, and this all points to this case that I brought up about the water company and a seagull landing in a substation and tripping the supply. Let's say that this wire is at 230 volts, and this wire is at 0 volts. Yeah? It's a polyphase system. So in time, this is at 230 volts, and this one's at 0 volts. Does the seagull receive an electrical shock? Hands up for yes. Correct. And the reason being, because there's a differential, this is 230 and this is 0, that can drive electrical current through the seagull that's like this, and we get a fried seagull. Okay? So, that ends today's lecture. I'll take questions in a minute, but the next lecture is all about the real king of thieves, Basil the Ghost. And we'll examine this case in some detail. It's been made into a film, King of Thieves, and it focuses down on the Hatton Garden jewellery heist, where I won't go into it in much detail, we'll save that for tomorrow. Tomorrow's the next lecture. But basically, it's a gang of thieves that broke into and burgled. There's a distinct difference between a burglary, in a legal sense, between a burglary and a robbery. So this was a burglary, and they broke into a safe deposit store and burgled, they stole millions of pounds worth of jewels and gold bullion. And the way that they did it, because it's unique and in some way comical, they made it into a film with Michael Caine. These are all English actors, some famous, Michael Gambon, this Jim Broadbent, Ray Winston. But my involvement is around this guy. And he was nicknamed Basil the Ghost, and I'll go into why he was nicknamed Basil the Ghost. I'll go into how he was caught, what he was alleged to have done, and the consequences of the forensic input and evidence, and also the interactions in court and the things that went on in court. So hopefully it'll be an interesting talk. So at this point, is there any questions? But this gentleman.
Well, I don't think there's any scientific differences between but are there any legal differences between the way stand out?
The gentleman's asking, is there any scientific differences between electrical systems in the UK and the US? And the answer is scientifically no. I often get asked by solicitors, have you got any experience on working on electrical cars? Then I have to answer no. But in all electrical systems, all the electrical parameters, the interaction, and we talked about this the other day, voltage, current, resistance, at a fundamental level, it's all the same. So whether we're working in electronics, which is below voltage, or we're working in thousands of amps, the interactions can be exactly the same. And your second part of your question was? I've answered it, haven't I?
I didn't think there was a scientific difference. I did think there might be some legal differences.
Okay, thank you. Kelvin, your answer?
I had, you guys protection box that we see on the screen.
Yes.
Because of your nature, what you're professing, have you ever seen any boxes on the ship that were iffy?
Respectfully, I'm employed by NCL today, and part of the contract says you will not say anything derogatory about NCL. So if you buy me a pint, yes, sir.
Has there yet been any discoveries about the fire at Heathrow in March?
Yes, there has, I think. The gentleman asked, we had a fire at Heathrow Airport, and he was in an electrical substation. And the fact that the fire damaged the substation, it shut down Heathrow Airport, a major transport hub for all over the world. I think it was for 2 days, is that? 3 days. And actually, I put an advertisement on my website saying, oh, fire at Heathrow Airport, need an expert witness. Oh, might get the job here. I don't think they've actually published the real cause, but my understanding, reading between the lines, it's a lack of maintenance. And it will be things like we've seen here, that just little things, lack of maintenance, doing this when they should have done it, can have a catastrophic effect. And that must be, in terms of insurance losses, not only personal insurance where people's flights are cancelled and things like that, they'll bring a claim. Airlines will bring a claim. Oh, it must be millions. But anyway, thank you so much for your attention. So with your agreement, we'll all meet tomorrow, if you want to. 10 o'clock, it's a date.